Hey, welcome to That One Time, the place for unforgettable moments and stories worth sharing. Funny, touching, surprising, just like life itself. Grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's dive in. The sound of a smartphone ringtone chiming closer to noon on a completely ordinary working Thursday once again divided Sarah's life into the happy period before and the almost hopeless period after. The familiar word mom lit up on the screen. Although calls in the middle of the day weren't a frequent occurrence, the woman didn't feel any bad premonitions about it. What if? Maybe mom missed her or wanted advice on choosing clothes. Sarah put a pencil dot on the margin of the sheet with the client's contract draft and hurried to answer the call so as not to worry her loved one with a long wait. As soon as the woman heard her mother's voice, which sounded unusually muffled as it seemed to her, her heart plummeted somewhere down. It was obvious that something not at all joyful had happened, and the assumption, unfortunately, was confirmed. "Sally, hello. Please don't worry too much. It just so happens that I'm in the hospital right now." Sarah was alarmed. "Mom, what happened? Which hospital are you in? What are the doctors saying? What do you need brought? What's the room number?" The voice from the receiver interrupted the stream of questions. "Sally, I beg you, don't worry. It all happened like in a movie. I slipped, I fell, I almost lost consciousness. But everything is fine. Our neighbor Carol was passing by. She cheered me up and supported me while we waited for the ambulance. The doctor said everything will be fine, but I'll have to stay in the hospital for a little while." Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner? I would have rushed over, helped. I didn't want to bother you in the middle of your workday, but visiting hours here are in the evening, from 4 to 7, and if you go home from the office first, then to the pharmacy, I was afraid you might not make it. Anyway, please write down what you need to bring here. The main things are my insurance policy and a phone charger. Water too, not sparkling, because for some reason I'm very thirsty. Invisible to Sarah, her mother sighed, and the woman vividly imagined how her loved one's face was distorted by pain shock. She hurried to end the conversation, clarifying the hospital and room number. Sarah reread the list of everything her mother had dictated, added chicken broth and wet wipes to it, and went on shaky legs to ask her boss for leave. "Robert Stevenson, may I please leave early today? I need to due to personal circumstances. My mother is in the hospital." The boss, a friend of Sarah's husband from their student years, expressed polite words of sympathy. Upon learning which hospital his subordinate's mother was in, he encouraged her and inquired, "The doctors at our regional hospital are good. Maybe the setting isn't too luxurious, but both the equipment and the staff are top-notch. I've been in that hospital several times, discharged good as new, so everything will be fine. Don't get down. By the way, are you driving today, or is David using the car? Maybe Paul can give you a lift in his car." Sarah was touched by her boss's concern and decided she wasn't in a position to refuse the suggested option. "Thank you, Robert Stevenson. That would be very helpful. I won't keep the driver long. I just need to stop by Mom's house and that's it. I won't delay Paul any longer. I'll gather the necessary things there and then I'll call a taxi. Thank you." The manager wished Sarah success and promised, "Come out to the central entrance in 15 minutes. I'll tell Paul to wait for you near your mother's house and drop you off at your and David's family nest. He has to come back for me anyway, and your house is on the way." Thanking the thoughtful boss again, Sarah went to turn off her computer and tidy up her workspace. She took the contract with her so as not to let the whole team down and to finish the necessary work by the next morning. The woman barely registered the meaning of the stories the driver tried to entertain her with, but was even grateful that the stream of his chatter forced her to react in some way and prevented her from sinking into anxious thoughts. Following the list, checking off each item, Sarah gathered things in her mother's apartment and watered her favorite flowers. Just in case, she turned off the gas and water, checked the refrigerator for anything perishable, collected the trash to take out, and only then went downstairs and continued on with the talkative Paul. Near Sarah and David's house was a supermarket with a pharmacy section inside, and the woman decided to stop there on the way. Asking Paul to stop near the trash containers, she threw away the collected garbage and rushed in for groceries. Moving almost on autopilot, Sarah bought everything she needed and soon was simultaneously preparing dinner for her husband and broth for her mother. While the food was cooking and baking, Sarah called David and explained the situation. "Dave, Mom's in the hospital. I'm going to her. I don't know exactly how long I'll be there yet. Dinner will be on the stove." The man admitted, "I know. Robert told me you needed support. Wait for me. I'll try to get home early and we'll go to the hospital together. You never know what else might be needed, and I'll be there to help." David didn't let his wife down and, picking her up along with the 2 bags she had packed, drove her to the hospital. Sarah managed to persuade the nurse who was accepting deliveries to let her see her mother and the attending physician, who, fortunately, was there. David stayed waiting for his wife in the lobby, but verbally conveyed kind words and wishes for a speedy recovery. Eleanor Peterson tried to smile when she saw Sarah enter the room, but it was obvious that she was both uncomfortable and scared. The woman quietly but clearly greeted everyone in the room and went to her mother's bed. A weight was suspended from the poor woman's right leg. Her lips, bitten almost to the point of bleeding, clearly showed that the victim of the ice had been in great pain. Sarah listened to her mother's story of how she got into the predicament and, trying not to cry, began putting everything she had brought into the bedside table. The phone was immediately put on charge. Sarah gave her mother the cooked broth and made her eat a few spoonfuls of raw, finely grated carrots. The internet says this kind of salad is the best vitamin remedy in the first days after an injury. Then I'll give you some sour berry juice. That's good for you too. "Oh, daughter, don't worry. You should probably go. David will come home. He'll probably be surprised you're not there." Sarah explained that her husband knew what had happened, had rushed home so she wouldn't have to take a taxi, that he wasn't allowed in, but he sent his regards. As if she had only been waiting for this remark, the woman in the next bed became active. "The orderlies and nurses here are rude and boorish," she interrupted. "You can't get them day or night. They just drink tea and hover around the doctors. Giving them chocolates, even money, is useless. They still do their jobs half-heartedly." Sarah remained silent, and after finding out her mother's doctor's full name, went to look for him. The restless neighbor didn't miss the opportunity to remark, "If he's not in the staff room, look in the dressing room. He's probably sweet-talking someone there." Thanking the grumbler dryly, Sarah went out into the corridor. The nurses in traumatology, used to all sorts of patient relatives, tears, and hysterics, looked at the visitor asking how to find the doctor with a mixture of irritation and fatigue. But one of them, who seemed like the head nurse, answered thoroughly, "George Stevenson is currently in the head doctor's office down that end of the corridor, the second to last door. You can wait there or sit on the bench near the staff room here." Sarah waited for the doctor, and he, upon learning that she was Eleanor Peterson's daughter, invited her into the office. Showing the X-ray on the computer screen, George Stevenson explained, "If I can put it this way, your mother's fracture was a good one. Generally, there are 2 treatment options." The man began explaining the nuances of each method, then asked, "Which option have you decided on?" Sarah looked the doctor in the eye but didn't answer, instead asking a counter question. "Tell me, George Stevenson, for example, if a close personal friend of yours had a fracture like my mother's, what would you recommend?" Smiling, the doctor answered briefly, "Osteosynthesis. In a very similar case with my aunt, our head doctor performed a similar operation. She's been leading an active life again for a year now, even working in her garden, so I can't keep up with her." The woman clarified all the details of the upcoming operation and wrote down what else needed to be brought for the post-operative period. Saying goodbye to the doctor, she left the office. Sarah had to tell her mother that the operation was scheduled for the very next day, and, composing herself, the woman presented it as lightly as possible, trying not to alarm her loved one. "I'll come tomorrow and meet you after the operation. Everything will be fine, don't worry." "Sadie, what about your work? Your boss will probably be angry?" "Don't worry about that. I'll get all the work done and won't let you or my boss down." With the operation, the long journey for Eleanor Peterson to walk again had only just begun. For 2 weeks, Sarah visited her mother almost daily to feed and care for her. The woman tried to object and repeatedly stated, "Sadie, take care of yourself. Don't come to me so often. They feed me quite well here, and I don't have much appetite anyway. How could I when I'm not expending any energy?" However, Eleanor Peterson couldn't convince her daughter. When the day of discharge arrived, Sarah went to see the doctor for recommendations. George Stevenson was cautious and warned, "Your mother is a very energetic lady, but I've expressed my point of view and I'll repeat it to you. I wouldn't be overly optimistic if I were you. But you shouldn't despair either. Although you absolutely cannot put full weight on the injured limb, crutches are Eleanor Peterson's best friends for the next month for sure, and even after that, you need to be careful. Moving is necessary, of course, but cautiously. Preventive treatment is indicated to prevent bed sores. In 6 weeks, I'll be waiting for a control X-ray to check the stage of bone fusion. That seems to be everything," Sarah clarified. "Maybe some vitamins for Mom?" George Stevenson shrugged. "In principle, yes, but generally, the rehabilitation plan should be explained to you at the local clinic." Sarah called a special taxi service specializing in transporting people with limited mobility. After heroically navigating the access roads, Eleanor Peterson finally found herself in her apartment. A new problem arose for Sarah. Her mother's physical condition still left much to be desired, and even a simple trip to the bathroom or kitchen could result in a new injury. At first, Sarah visited Eleanor Peterson twice a day, and by the time the New Year holidays approached, she was practically exhausted. Traffic jams took up so much time that only a few miserable hours were left for sleep. Sarah turned to her husband. "Dave, how about we have Mom stay with us for a while? At least I won't have to rush between apartments." The man's face darkened, and after a long pause, he replied, "Sarah, I think the world of your mother. Eleanor Peterson is a wonderful woman, but I'm sorry I have to be direct. We simply don't have anywhere to put her here. As you know, we have a studio apartment. Even though the room is large in terms of square footage, it's only one room. When I tried to persuade you to get a mortgage, I didn't get any understanding. Both you and your mother were against it. Dave, well, couldn't we put up some kind of screen? It would be like 2 rooms. Listen, Eleanor Peterson would be uncomfortable first and foremost. I play computer games loudly, I listen to music late at night. Besides, ask her yourself, would she agree to move? I can say with 100% certainty that she'll say no. Your mother is very tactful and wise and understands that the further away she lives, the better her relationship with her son-in-law will be." David was right. Eleanor Peterson, as soon as she heard the idea of moving into her son-in-law and daughter's apartment, just snorted indignantly. "There can't even be a conversation about it. Home is where the heart is. I won't go to your place, especially since it would be uncomfortable to be sick there." Sarah submitted to her mother's will, and she didn't want to argue with her husband at all. She continued to spend time in traffic jams, and her lawyer position at Robert Stevenson's firm had to be vacated. With her boss's permission, Sarah transferred to part-time work and was very glad that her manager had been able to accommodate her. She prepared contracts during visits, trained her successor, and diligently performed all duties that didn't require constant presence in the office. However, rehabilitation was costing much more money than the woman could have imagined. Sometimes she shared her indignation with her husband about how pharmacies changed prices at will and tried to sell the most expensive version of medication. And then David would grumble, "Listen, Sarah, surely your mother should be provided with some free medications, right?" The woman tried not to answer this. After all, the family budget wasn't suffering, and she hadn't asked her husband for money in the almost 6 months since the fateful news of her mother's troubles. Sarah generally tried to handle the situation herself without involving David. The weather changed, but Sarah's schedule, by established tradition, remained almost unchanged. In the morning, she prepared breakfast for her husband, and if she had time, prepared food for lunch and dinner. Then, packing some of the breakfast in a container, she rushed to her mother's, stopping at the store and pharmacies on the way. Care, maintaining spirits, and helping with movement around the apartment took a lot of time. Then Sarah would stop by the office and rush home in the evening. In case of any emergencies, her neighbor, the same Carol who had helped her wait for the ambulance, had a key to her mother's apartment. She sometimes visited to watch TV together and gossip about something, so Eleanor Peterson couldn't be called abandoned. But Sarah desperately wanted to get her mother back on her feet quickly, and not just because she had to spend a lot of time on daily, non-stop travel between very distant parts of the city. It was simply that her mother was the closest person to her. She had, in essence, given Sarah life twice, the first time on her birthday 38 years ago, but the main time was later, when a terrible tragedy struck Sarah like a terrible avalanche. It was her mother who was there during those dark days, helping her move when her legs almost gave out from nervous strain, forcing her to drink and eat with coaxing, sometimes against her will. Giving up her well-paying, easy job, her mother sold her apartment in their hometown and practically moved her, like a huge, clumsy bundle, 2,000 kilometers away from the place where everything reminded Sarah of her inhuman grief. It was Eleanor Peterson who made her get a job where it was almost impossible to be alone with her sad thoughts, where she had to look stylish and fit. Sarah didn't consider her help to her mother a sacrifice, and despite her fatigue, tried to surround her husband with care as well, especially since their 10th wedding anniversary was approaching, and the woman wanted to arrange a touching congratulation and a pleasant surprise for the patient David. She had already prepared a preliminary menu, found a confectionery that took orders for custom designs, and arranged for a special-shaped cake for her husband, who adored sweets. The holiday was approaching, but shortly before it arrived, David warned during breakfast, "Sorry, Sarah, I need the car for a few days. I have to go to the branch in the neighboring region. It seems the branch manager there is messing with the reports. Profit has dropped significantly, although everything is stable in other divisions, and some are even showing growth. I'll try to be quick, of course, but planes probably won't fly to those areas, and I really don't fancy going by train. Can you manage without the car?" Although Sarah had been counting on their trusty family car herself, she didn't argue. After all, David really needed the car more. She smiled. "Of course I can manage." David politely thanked her for breakfast and promised, "Don't worry, we'll buy you a metal horse too. Things at work will normalize a bit and you can choose the model." Running out of the house, the man kissed his wife on the cheek, winked, and said, "Don't worry, I remember our wedding anniversary. I'll try to be back by Friday evening." Taking advantage of her husband's absence, Sarah temporarily moved in with her mother to save time on the commute. In those few days, she managed to do a thorough cleaning, and the apartment felt especially fresh, like spring. Only on the eve of the holiday did Sarah have to return home to bring an urgently needed diploma to the office. However, this was even convenient because she also needed to tidy up the house and prepare some of David's favorite salads. In the morning, the woman, taking the festive treats she had set aside in separate containers, rushed to her mother's again. As usual, she gave her a massage, helped her walk around the room, and even after waiting for the elevator repair to finish, finally took her mother outside so she could enjoy the good weather and the feeling that life was returning to what it was before the injury. After a short walk, Eleanor Peterson and Sarah had lunch, and her daughter began to apologize. "Mom, I'm sorry, but I'm leaving a little early today. I want to prepare a surprise for David. If you get tired of the TV, your keys and phone are charged. If anything happens, call." "Okay, go on, Sadie. Happy holiday to you and David." Imagine, 10 years together already. Kissing her mother, Sarah ran along the route she had planned in advance. Spring, which had long taken hold and was rapidly approaching summer, offered gentle warmth, and the sweet and tart scent of blooming lilac set the most romantic mood. Contrary to popular belief that marrying in May brings trouble, she didn't have to suffer in her second marriage. On the contrary, David was a quiet harbor for the woman. There were no stormy passions between them, but there was mutual affection and respect. Sarah valued her husband for not prying into her soul, not tormenting her with jealousy and suspicion, and not demanding that she bear him an heir. When he first declared his serious intentions, Sarah had told him directly and honestly that children were absolutely not in her plans. This statement didn't scare the man. A few years after the wedding, David asked if she had changed her mind about having a child, but upon hearing a categorical no, he didn't ask for the reasons and never brought up the topic again. The man was a good partner, and of course she loved him in her own way, with all the strength her wounded heart was capable of. Following the list she had made the day before, Sarah bought drinks, got the squid that David adored, and bought various small things: a crispy baguette, fresh green salad, and fruit. Little by little, 2 large shopping bags, which Sarah had thoughtfully brought with her, filled up. Hanging them on both shoulders, she stopped by the confectionery where she had ordered the cake. Now she could go home. Approaching the entrance, Sarah looked hopefully at their family parking spot and sighed with relief. The car wasn't there. This meant she would have time to set the table, hang up balloons, and get dressed before her husband returned. Mentally praising herself for the convenient bags that left one hand free, the woman, hurriedly opening the door, finally found herself in their family nest. Placing the cake box on the bench, Sarah suddenly froze in surprise. A strange sound emanating from the kitchen brazenly intruded on the usual hum of the apartment building. Strange, there were no unfamiliar shoes on the mat, no strange things were visible, but she could distinctly hear the clatter of dishes as if someone was moving a heavy plate or a large mug. David and Sarah didn't keep pets. They had always wanted to get a cute dog, but the misfortune with her mother had adjusted that plan. It would probably have been much wiser to go out onto the landing, close the door, and call her husband. But from exhaustion, Sarah didn't act as safety dictated. Automatically slipping off her sneakers and with the bag still on her shoulders, the woman entered the kitchen and almost collapsed from surprise. A boy who looked about 6 years old was sitting on a chair with one leg tucked under him. The unknown little guest was completely absorbed in eating. On the table in front of him was David's huge mug, a bottle of water, and a large deep plate into which Sarah had layered a salad the night before so it would soak through. A spoon sticking out of the side clearly indicated that the dish had already been unceremoniously sampled. The child was biting into a stick of dried sausage with appetite, and the woman, overwhelmed by memories, felt a pang in her heart. It was too painful to act rationally. For a few seconds, Sarah even thought that she was hallucinating due to overwork or some other reason. However, the vision was too realistic. The sound, the image, and even the smell of the sausage. The engrossed boy only tore himself away from his tasty activity after Sarah, her voice a little hoarse from nervous shock, attracted his attention with a question. "Hey, hello, who are you? And what are you doing here?" The boy jumped up from the chair and, without letting go of the sausage, reported, "My name is Mikey. Uncle David brought me here and told me to wait for him. He said I could eat anything I wanted, so I'm eating. The sausage is tasty, just very salty." It didn't even occur to Sarah that the person the boy called Uncle David was not her husband David. Such an incredible coincidence, like in a traditional New Year's movie where the hero didn't realize he had opened someone else's apartment with his keys and was completely unfazed by the typical setting of a standard apartment, simply couldn't happen. Sarah could confidently vouch that it would be hard to find a design even remotely similar to their home. Of course, there must be a logical explanation for the boy's appearance in the kitchen, the woman thought. She herself had married David in the spring, and the boy's last name meant absolutely nothing to her. Her husband was an only child, but as far as Sarah knew, he had cousins. However, they hadn't been invited to their modest wedding, and she didn't know them not only by sight, but also by name. So it was quite possible that Mikey sitting in front of her was the child of one of her husband's cousins. But why had he brought this boy to their apartment without even warning her? Knocked off her psychological balance, Sarah couldn't concentrate, her thoughts were jumbled, and she hadn't even managed to come up with any plausible version when David called. Coming out of her stupor, Sarah finally took the bags off her shoulders and answered the call. The man started talking quickly, literally not letting his wife get a word in. "Darling, we just missed each other. I just left Eleanor Peterson's apartment and I'll be there in literally 20 minutes and explain everything to you. In the meantime, set the table." The bewildered woman felt a little better and replied briefly, "Okay." She felt Mikey's gaze on her very distinctly, but couldn't bring herself to look him in the eye. The woman brought her new slippers from the hallway, which she had just recently bought in anticipation of the approaching summer season, and offered, "Mikey, it's hot indoors in sneakers. Here, take these slippers, put them on. It will be more comfortable and convenient." The child silently obeyed. To lighten the mood and occupy the boy who had been dropped on her, but at the same time avoid having to talk to him much, Sarah asked, "Mikey, do you know how to inflate balloons?" The boy nodded. The woman quickly went to the room, brought the child a whole package, opened it, then, obeying some impulse, rinsed the tips through which Mikey was to inflate the balloons and handed them to him, asking, "Don't inflate them too much. When you get tired, rest and I'll help you tie them. Agreed?" The child nodded businesslike and without any embarrassment asked, "Is your name Sarah?" Sarah shrugged. "My name can be changed in different ways. Sarah, Sally, and Sadie." Mikey's eyes widened in surprise. "But those are boys' names. Are you like a man?" Sarah chuckled. "No, I'm not a man. It's just a versatile name, like Alex or Jamie." Silence hung in the kitchen. The boy, lost in thought, busied himself with the balloons. Sarah, keeping an eye on her guest out of the corner of her eye, began unpacking the bags, preparing what she had planned, and gradually setting the table. The woman put the cake in the refrigerator and, pausing to tie the balloons Mikey had inflated, felt not irritation, but a gnawing pain. She wasn't angry with her husband, but all sorts of thoughts kept swirling in her head. The woman felt the curious gaze of the little guest on her, but didn't dare to look him in the eye. So they watched each other, but barely spoke. Busy with chores, Sarah didn't even notice David enter the kitchen with a huge bouquet of roses in his hands and a large bag. The man put his load on the floor and handed his wife the flowers. "Sarah, congratulations to you and me on our anniversary. I see you've already met Mikey, made friends. That's wonderful. Well, shall we celebrate then?" The boy, visibly cheered by David's arrival, said shyly, "Congratulations." And when everyone sat down at the table after the inevitable fuss, he boasted loudly, "Uncle David, I inflated the balloons myself, and Sarah helped me tie them. We prepared a good surprise for you." The adult man mumbled something unintelligibly in response to the little guest's chatter, praising Mikey and his wife, who hadn't even touched the food. There was tension in the apartment, and David set about fixing the situation. He quietly turned on some music and began enthusiastically praising the dishes his wife had prepared. Then he proposed a toast to Sarah's beauty and charm, took a small box from his pocket, handed it to her, and said, "Congratulations, I hope you like it." The woman, confused by assumptions and thoughts about why her husband had brought a child into the apartment, only now remembered her own gift. Leaving the not-so-cheerful company for a moment, Sarah, clutching the unopened box in her hand, took out the hidden present. Returning to the table, she handed her husband the package and limited herself to a curt phrase, "Happy tin anniversary." David, hastily tearing open the wrapping paper, began loudly admiring the tin flask and started showing the gift to Mikey. The woman felt uncomfortable and once again sank into her thoughts. This was not at all how she had imagined celebrating their wedding anniversary. She had wanted to prepare a surprise, but her husband had managed not just to surprise her, but to completely unbalance her in the most natural way. "Unexpected things again?" Sarah coughed violently, choking on mineral water, when she heard the question addressed to her. "Sarah, Mikey will stay with us for a couple of weeks, okay?" Sarah was silent, not knowing what to say. David tried to justify himself. "I stopped by Eleanor Peterson's to pick you up. On the way home, I wanted to explain everything to you, but I didn't have time, and that's how this surprise happened. I'm sorry I didn't think to warn you, but I was sure I'd find you at your mother's and would warn you on the way that we had a guest with us." David's monologue ended in a long silence. Sarah moved food around on her plate with a fork, not looking up at her husband. He, flustered, also didn't know what else to say in his defense. With childlike spontaneity, Mikey broke the silence, asking brightly, "Aunt Sarah, thank you. I've already eaten. Can I try the cake now?" The boy showed his empty plate. With a stony face, Sarah got up from her chair and went to the refrigerator. She wanted to scream, stomp her feet, sob, and smash the dishes, stained like her faith in her husband's honesty. She knew it wouldn't make things any easier. The most likely explanation for David bringing Mikey to the apartment seemed to be her husband's infidelity. With her whole being, Sarah now hated the man she had loved for 10 years as much as she was capable. David, who knew his wife well, guessed from her jerky movements that in a moment she would say everything that was on her mind. He decided to lead the little guest away from the table to the seating area, where he could be distracted from the serious adult conversation that was about to take place. "Mikey, come on. I'll turn on the game console for you. The games are mostly complicated, but we can find something you like online, or I'll put on cartoons for you if you want." "And will I be able to eat the cake?" the boy asked with interest. "Of course, you can have anything there." The boy's eyes sparkled. He trustingly followed the owner of the apartment to the cozy, soft seating area. Sarah, who had overheard her husband and guest's conversation, cut a large piece of cake, carefully placed it on a plate, turned on the electric kettle, and watched it boil intently. The click of it turning off snapped her out of her reverie. Having brewed the tea, the woman placed a cup of the tasty drink, a sugar bowl with a spoon, and the plate with cake on a tray, and then carried it to the table near the apartment's gaming area. David was showing Mikey his collection of computer games, but the boy, who was clearly well-behaved, tore himself away from the engrossing activity and thanked her. "Thank you very much." The woman nodded and, turning abruptly, left. When David entered the kitchen, he found a strange scene. Sarah was sitting on the floor, holding dirty children's sneakers, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. The man tried to joke, "Hey Sarah, what's wrong?" "Big deal. A child came into the kitchen in dirty shoes. We'll turn on the robot vacuum cleaner now. Let it work. It's nothing. Is it worth getting upset over a little dust? Especially today of all days." Sarah looked at her husband in such a way that he felt uneasy and quietly said, "Dave, I think I've told you repeatedly that I don't want to be in the same space with children for long. It's beyond my strength. Perhaps there were significant circumstances behind your action, or as you called it, surprise, and I can understand you, but forgive me, I have absolutely no desire to sort things out today. I'm going to my mother's now and just, for a little while." David couldn't understand the reason for his wife's categorical decision, but he could clearly see that Sarah was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, so he offered, "Sarah, I truly am very sorry that I didn't warn you, but I can't explain everything. I think that when you listen to me, you'll understand that I simply couldn't have acted differently. I'll wait until you're ready to talk." The woman unexpectedly gently placed the children's sneakers on the floor, wiped the tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand, and walked towards the door as if she hadn't heard her husband. David took his wife's hand and asked, "Sarah, wait a minute. I'll call a taxi to Eleanor Peterson's house so I don't worry about you." Sarah nodded and soon was riding in the car, fidgeting with the innocent strap of her handbag. The road was clear, and the journey to her mother's house took much less time than during peak hours. As soon as the woman opened the door, she heard, "Carol, come in, dear. I'm not feeling very well." Sarah closed the door behind her and, taking off her shoes, went into her mother's bedroom. Eleanor Peterson was startled to see her daughter. "Sadie, why are you back? Didn't David come home? By my calculations, your wedding anniversary celebration should be in full swing, and for some reason, you're here. Daughter, what happened?" Sarah went to her mother's bed, sat down on the floor, and resting her head on Eleanor Peterson's hand, told her everything that had happened since she returned home and saw Mikey there. Finishing her story, Sarah voiced her assumption. "Mom, I'm almost certain that Mikey is David's illegitimate son. The boy looks about 6 years old, which means my husband has been cheating on me and even had the nerve to present me with proof of his infidelity right on our wedding anniversary." Eleanor Peterson tried to calm her daughter. "I'm sure David can explain everything. I feel that he loves you. Believe my experience, he would hardly risk his relationship with you and cheat." However, Sarah cried without stopping. The woman stroked her daughter, who was so grown up but helpless and sobbing, but didn't say another word because they were all powerless. Finally, when the flow of tears subsided, Sarah silently got up from the floor and went to wash her face, swollen from crying. The woman felt completely drained. Returning to her mother's room, Sarah confessed, "I'm very tired today. Do you mind if I lie down?" Eleanor Peterson didn't object or suggest, for example, talking more or having dinner. She understood that her unhappy daughter needed to rest. "Of course, Sadie, but let's both take something calming, maybe some valerian drops. It will be good for both of us." Sarah did as her mother asked and went to sleep. The nervous tension was so strong that the woman passed out and woke up when the clock showed 10 in the morning. Jumping up from the sofa, Sarah rushed to the kitchen where she found her mother stirring batter for pancakes. "Good morning, daughter. You're just in time. We'll have breakfast now." With 4 hands, the women made pancakes and, as if by agreement, didn't say a word about yesterday's situation. When Sarah was washing the dishes, Eleanor Peterson asked, "Daughter, please go to the theater with Carol. She has 2 tickets to a very good play, excellent seats in the stalls. Her niece gave them to her for her birthday. They were supposed to go together, and just as luck would have it, the niece got sick and the other relatives can't keep Carol company. Some are called by their gardens, some are flying on business trips. In short, the ticket is going to waste. It's a shame. Sarah shook her head. Mom, I don't want to go anywhere. I'm not in the mood at all. However, if Eleanor Peterson had decided on something, she knew how to insist. That's exactly why you should go, because you're not in the mood. Art is excellent at switching your thoughts and changing your emotions. Please, daughter, not for the wasted ticket, but for me. Although Sarah had to obey her mother's wish, she categorically refused the suggestion to stop by the hairdresser beforehand for a new haircut. After waiting for Carol to take Sarah away, Eleanor Peterson called her son-in-law and said in an almost commanding tone, David, Sarah will be gone for about 3 hours. Come over, we need to talk. The man didn't resist but warned, Eleanor Peterson, I will definitely come, but I have no one to leave Mikey with. I suppose I could find a hired nanny, but I wouldn't trust the boy to just anyone, so I can only come with him. Do you mind? The woman sighed. I don't mind. Excellent. Then I'll be at your place with Mikey in half an hour. 30 minutes later, Eleanor Peterson, carefully walking to the door leaning on her sturdy walker, let David and Mikey into the apartment. The man introduced the child and the boy politely greeted her. The hostess tried not to betray her incredible excitement and hospitably invited Mikey into the kitchen. Come in, I have a TV there and pastries are waiting for you. Would you like cocoa or tea? The child announced that coffee was the tastiest thing for him, but children shouldn't drink it often. He would have tea, because he was already too old for cocoa. Eleanor Peterson almost laughed from surprise, but quickly got her emotions under control, and addressing David asked, Can I offer Mikey a chicory drink then? It's almost like coffee. The boy was delighted. I want to try this chicory. Uncle David, can I? David agreed. And when the hostess skillfully managed to prepare the treat for Mikey, the man handed the boy his smartphone and explained, I need to talk to Eleanor Peterson. Please stay here, eat your treat, play on the phone, maybe even watch some videos online, okay? Of course, Uncle David. I can manage without supervision, don't worry. Watching this scene, Eleanor Peterson could barely hold back tears, and hiding her emotions, slowly started walking towards the room she old-fashionedly called the drawing room. David followed her, eager to find out what Eleanor Peterson wanted to talk to him about. The woman settled into an armchair, and the man sat on the sofa diagonally across from her so they could talk comfortably. The hostess watched her son-in-law carefully, but he didn't wait long and asked without preamble, Eleanor Peterson, explain to me why Sarah reacted so inadequately to Mikey's appearance in our apartment. I admit it's partly my fault that I didn't warn her, but we're adults. Instead of talking calmly, she basically just ran away to you. Is that normal? The woman didn't interrupt her son-in-law's indignant speech, but she wasn't in a hurry to answer his question, instead asking one of her own. Before we begin a difficult conversation to try and help my daughter save her family, I need to be sure that it makes sense. Just tell me honestly, is Mikey your illegitimate son? The man's indignation knew no bounds. No, of course not. I never even thought of cheating on Sarah. I love and respect her very much. My attitude towards children is starting to scare me. Mikey ended up in our apartment because of a desperate situation. Sarah didn't even try to get along with him, although, as you probably noticed, he is a well-behaved and intelligent, very charming boy. David's answer calmed the agitated woman, and taking a deep breath, as if preparing to parachute, she decided to tell the truth. Well, as they say, all secrets come to light. As her husband, you have the right to know why my daughter avoids contact with children. I think I have the right to tell you her story, which at first seemed like a happy fairy tale, and then turned into a terrible nightmare that destroyed her normal life. Sadie grew up a wonderful and intelligent girl. She was a real joy to me and my husband. We had no problem getting her into one of the best gymnasiums in our city. Our family's prosperity and the positions my husband and I held allowed Sadie to fit in with others from what they call the golden youth. However, the gymnasium had a very strong teaching staff, and grades weren't bought as you might have thought. They were skilled at getting the children interested in studying, and our Sadie was one of the best students in the class. She was even made a sort of mentor for her deskmate, Andrew. The boy was from a very good family, quite influential in our city. Imagine, his father was the regional prosecutor, and his mother held a significant position in the same department. In short, they lived better than our family, but they didn't hinder the friendship between their son and Sadie. They sincerely welcomed her, and they spoke to me and my husband not dismissively, but quite kindly. When Sadie was in 10th grade, her father died suddenly. A blood clot broke off, the autopsy showed. It was Andrew's family who supported me and Sadie after that loss. I'm still grateful to them for that, because I was in such a state that I almost followed my husband. So of course I didn't object at all when Sadie decided to marry Andrew. So what if she was just over 18 at that moment? It was obvious that you couldn't stand in the way of true feelings. Andrew's parents also didn't object and were even happy that my daughter became part of their family. A year after the wedding, Sadie and Andrew had twins, 2 boys, Anthony and Brian. They grew up healthy, cheerful, and strong, and brought joy to all of us. Sadie couldn't get enough of her children. You know, David, she used to tell me that she would walk, pushing the stroller in front of her, and her heart would almost jump out of her chest from happiness. Of course, I helped whenever I could. Her mother-in-law repeatedly offered Sadie to hire a reliable nanny, but my daughter always refused, and she mostly managed on her own. God knows what it cost her, but she didn't drop out of university and even managed without taking an academic leave. And her father-in-law got her a prestigious, well-paying job, in a position where the working day was strictly regulated and there was a benefits package and other perks. Of course, he had the means to do so, and it wasn't shameful to give his daughter-in-law preferential treatment. Sadie was very intelligent. Anthony and Brian were 6 years old when my daughter became pregnant again. Andrew greeted the news joyfully. And why would he be upset? The family relationships were wonderful. As far as I know, there wasn't a single quarrel between them, as if 2 halves were lucky enough to unite into one whole. I know many envied them, and some women tried to start a romance with Andrew, but he didn't need anyone but my Sadie. Everything was so perfect that it never even occurred to us that everything would collapse overnight due to a terrible tragedy. Sadie had to go to the doctor, and Andrew volunteered to pick up the boys from kindergarten himself. By a ridiculous coincidence, his car broke down that day, and he decided not to call a taxi, but to walk the children home through the park. The weather was wonderful, and although the rides weren't working yet, there was a pizzeria at the park exit that the boys eagerly wanted to go into. On the way, Andrew met a friend, and while he was talking to him, the children, getting playful, ran out onto the lake, but the March ice turned out to be treacherously thin. My grandsons, as witnesses later recounted, didn't even have time to scream. They instantly went under the water. Andrew and his friend rushed to the water, but the boys could only be retrieved by divers who arrived at the scene of the tragedy. Andrew later tried to justify himself, repeating like a broken record that he had only been distracted for a few seconds. But what was the point? Our boys drowned. It couldn't be undone. My son-in-law was the first to tell me this bitter news because he was afraid for Sarah, and not without reason. I went to the private clinic where I knew Sadie was at the time. My heart told me it would be best if doctors were nearby when the terrible grief struck my daughter. Seeing me in the corridor, Sarah probably understood everything from my face. After hearing the news of what had happened, she had a hysterical breakdown. It was impossible to calm Sadie down even with a large dose of medication. She didn't make it home that evening. She ended up in the hospital with a nervous breakdown. From the stress over her deceased sons, my daughter couldn't carry the baby she was expecting. The doctors didn't even consider it a child yet, but she had already lost it. At Anthony and Brian's funeral, Sadie stood like a stone statue, without tears, without emotion, pale as death. The emptiness in her eyes was especially terrifying. Andrew suffered no less, his hair turning gray at 25. He tried to take Sadie's hand to support her, but she recoiled from him as if he were a leper. She never again crossed the threshold of the apartment where she had lived with her husband and sons. Countless times Andrew tried to talk to her, but it never worked. Sadie simply erased her husband from her life. Andrew's mother came to us, realizing that my daughter didn't want to see or hear her husband. She stood on her knees, begging her to forgive her son, saying that he wasn't himself anymore, sharing sad thoughts that he was on the verge and might leave this world. But Sarah didn't react at all. She could never forgive her husband for the death of their sons. Andrew also couldn't forgive himself. He truly turned from a vibrant man into a pale imitation of his former self. Sarah predictably quit her job, seemingly voluntarily, but everyone understood that she simply couldn't be under constant public scrutiny. Moreover, an unusual and unexpected problem arose. My daughter would approach hysterics if she went outside and saw a child. She changed her route, but it's absolutely impossible to completely avoid encountering children. One day, Sadie and I were in the elevator, and a neighbor with a toddler came in with us. Everything seemed fine, but I got anxious. After the fellow passengers got out, I looked at my daughter and saw blood running down her chin. She had bitten her lip so hard trying to suppress a fit of hysterics. After that incident, my daughter stayed home for almost a month, day and night. I even called a specialist doctor, the best of the best, to the house. There were changes, but they weren't quick and weren't positive at all. After a period of apathy, my daughter became aggressive, as if she was possessed, and the medication prescribed by the doctor couldn't control it for long. Sarah took the pills, would fall into a state of indifference to everything for a few hours, and then would start agonizingly thinking about something, pacing back and forth in the room. Once I saw her searching online for poisons, and I was seriously scared. I realized that my daughter had decided to deal with the unwitting culprit of her children's death. I tried to be by her side constantly, watching over my daughter so she wouldn't do anything irreparable. One day, Sadie managed to leave the house in the morning while I was sleeping. Friends later told me that she ambushed Andrew near his work and attacked him with her fists, shouting, "Why are you alive when our sons aren't?" I don't know, maybe my friends exaggerated, but apparently 4 strong men could barely pull her away from a bewildered Andrew. He didn't even resist. When I came to get her, my daughter was sitting in a back room, where the smell of hated Corvalol and some other medications hung in the air, and she was barely reacting to anything. They told me an ambulance had come and sedated Sarah. Among friends and neighbors, of course, all anyone talked about was the accident with my grandsons and how Sarah was losing her mind from grief. One day, Andrew's father called me and strongly asked me to leave the city with my daughter. "You don't refuse people like him." Besides, I myself was thinking about how to hide my daughter from memories, from sympathetic and curious glances. I quit my job, sold my apartment. Again, thanks to my son-in-law's parents, I managed to do it quickly and at a quite reasonable price, considering the urgency. Sadie and Andrew were divorced in absentia, again thanks to his relatives. My daughter didn't even have to go anywhere. In the end, we moved to this city, away from everything. Well, after that, you know the rest, David. You met her, and my daughter started coming back to life. Don't think Sadie doesn't hate children, it's just that she's still in pain. She even refuses the possibility of becoming a mother again because of the fear of repeating the nightmare she went through. Eleanor Peterson fell silent. Telling her daughter's terrible story had exhausted the woman emotionally. David noticed how pale her face had become and hurried to the kitchen to bring her water. Mikey was engrossed in playing on the phone, and the man, stroking his head, filled a glass and returned to the living room to Eleanor Peterson. "I'm sorry I made you recall all that." The woman, carefully drinking the water, said bitterly, "Oh, David, if only it were possible to forget." Perhaps you should have known about Sadie's past sooner. I couldn't bring myself to tell all this out loud. My daughter, as I understand it, still can't talk about it either. The man looked at the woman, puzzled, and admitted, "Honestly, I couldn't even imagine that such a tragedy could be hidden behind Sarah's unwillingness to become a mother. I thought maybe she didn't want to ruin her figure. It's hard to even imagine what she felt when she saw Mikey in our kitchen. What a surprise I managed to create, right on our wedding anniversary. How can I ask Sarah for forgiveness now so she understands me? I truly had nowhere else to take Mikey, and for a number of reasons, the boy needed to be sheltered for a week or two in a comfortable and safe place where his parents' enemies wouldn't even think to look. It all happened almost by chance. I arrived at the branch and ran into an old friend on the street, whom I hadn't seen since demobilization. Oliver is more than a friend to me. It's only thanks to him that I survived in the army, but that's a long story. And in civilian life, life took us to our respective hometowns, and as happens, we lost touch. I tried to find him on social media once. Maybe I should have searched more persistently, then I would have found him, but I got caught up building my career. In short, we hadn't seen each other for about 15 years. And here I meet Oliver in a city that's unfamiliar to both of us. He's changed, of course, over the years, but I recognized him immediately. He almost walked past me without noticing, but I stopped him. It turned out that Oliver had come to sort out problems for his sister and her husband. They got involved in a lawsuit with some not-so-reasonable people who were used to conducting all their affairs in a criminal way. Oliver was most worried about Mikey, his nephew. He explained to his sister that just in case, as a precaution, the child needed to be hidden, because these bandits could easily influence the outcome through him, but they couldn't come up with any reliable place. And then I appeared out of nowhere. Oliver's idea of taking Mikey out of the city seemed like an ideal option. Indeed, there were practically no leads that could point the bandits to the child's whereabouts. It's also good that the boy has a strong character, growing into a real man. His parents and Oliver told him that he needed to stay with me for a little while, and he accepted the news calmly. I picked him up like in a detective story, so as not to be caught by the city's surveillance cameras. We agreed with Oliver to get in touch in a week, and he was supposed to call me himself when the matter was resolved. Mikey, of course, is simply an ideal boy. He settled into the unfamiliar place easily and even put himself to bed, having brushed his teeth beforehand. All that's left is to wait for Oliver's call. It's very easy for me to communicate with Mikey, but on Monday I have to go to work, and I doubt I can take him with me. Now I don't know what to do at all. David fell silent. And then, unexpectedly for him and Eleanor Peterson, Sarah's voice was heard. Nothing special. You'll go to work as usual, and I'll stay with Mikey. Just leave me the car so I don't have to drag the boy on public transport to mom's and back. It turned out that contrary to Eleanor Peterson's calculations, her daughter had already returned from the theater and, it seemed, had heard some part of her husband's story. To her mother's preemptive question, Sarah explained, "I couldn't watch the play at the theater. I went to the restroom, washed my face, and realized I couldn't go back and stare at the stage without even trying to understand the plot. I typed a message to Carol with apologies and came here. It turned out I came back just in time. Perhaps I needed to hear Mikey's story from the outside, because Dave, forgive me, I suspected you of infidelity. I doubt I would have believed you if you had told me all this yesterday. Today I can look at this situation more rationally. Mom, you don't mind if I visit you with Mikey, do you?" The woman, trying not to scare away the change in her daughter's attitude towards children, spoke very cautiously. "Of course, come visit." Eleanor Peterson wanted to add something else, but her eyes stung betrayingly, and she decided to change the subject. "Sadie, David, aren't you hungry? I could eat something right now. Let's go to the kitchen. Besides, we need to see how Mikey is doing. If he's bored, I completely forgot about the rules of hospitality." The boy, seeing Sarah, didn't forget to greet her, and the woman's voice trembled slightly as she returned his greeting. David, who now understood the reason for his wife's strange behavior, was now amazed by her resilience. Having gone through such a life trial, she had managed to endure and never tried to appeal to his pity or evoke sympathy with stories of what she had faced. Sarah gently but persistently declined Eleanor Peterson's attempts to feed everyone who had gathered in her kitchen that evening. "Thank you, Mom, for everything, but I think we should go home. I'll stop by tomorrow closer to lunchtime." David, understanding that he had been forgiven by his wife, was very happy and warmly said goodbye to Eleanor Peterson, promising, "We'll all visit you together tomorrow. If you're feeling up to it and the weather is warm, we could go out into nature. What do you think?" "Wonderful, David. Let's not plan too far ahead." Saying goodbye to the hostess, Sarah, David, and Mikey set off for the other end of the city. The man got behind the wheel and saw in the mirror how carefully his wife buckled the boy into his seatbelt. It was obvious that for Sarah, this was a completely natural gesture, once brought to automatism. She had clearly been a tender, caring mother, had loved her children very much, and after the misfortune that struck her, had suffered in a way you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. Carefully parking the car near the entrance, The man carried the sleeping Mikey into the apartment in his arms. Sarah smoothed the rumpled sheet on the sofa, gently took off the boy's shoes, and covered him with a blanket. Watching his wife, David felt incredible tenderness towards her. Unexpectedly, his beloved woman revealed an unfamiliar side of her personality. He realized he had made absolutely the right choice. Later, closing the kitchen door, they drank tea with the leftover cake and, as if there had been no wall of misunderstanding between them yesterday, planned their Sunday schedule with jokes and kisses. The man finally decided to bring up the unpleasant topic and confessed, "Sarah, I'm a real idiot. I almost ruined everything with what I did, and I want to say a huge thank you for your understanding." His wife smiled. "Well, to be honest, I also overreacted. So I suggest we forget about it. Let's move on." The weekend passed cheerfully, and even better than the couple had anticipated. They even managed to get Eleanor Peterson out for a walk, and she was much less happy about the sunny May day than she was about her daughter's happy eyes. Sarah gladly answered Mikey's questions and also constantly watched to make sure he wasn't in danger. However, neither her mother nor her husband dared to make remarks or accuse her of being overprotective. Mikey, it seemed, didn't even notice that he was being surrounded by maximum care. By agreement with Sarah, he called her by her name, not using the word aunt, and looked quite pleased with his unexpected trip. After the outing, they dropped Eleanor Peterson off at home, and the trio stayed longer because there was simply no chance of leaving the woman's house unfed. However, no one objected. Late in the evening, as Sarah was tucking Mikey into bed, the boy quietly asked her, "Do you think my parents are okay? Will I see them soon?" Trying to make her voice sound firm and convincing, Sarah replied, "Of course they're fine. They'll finish all their business very soon and you'll see them." The calmed boy fell asleep. Sarah, afraid of waking the child, beckoned her husband into the kitchen and began asking him about the situation Mikey's parents were involved in. "Sarah, honestly, I don't even know all the details. Oliver gave me a very brief overview, but I understood that his sister and her husband were really targeted by some serious thugs." The woman began to ask clarifying questions that were unexpected for her husband. "Are these bandits from the city you went to, or are they outsiders? Did they call each other by any nicknames?" David told her everything he knew, but the information Sarah received wasn't enough, and she suddenly asked, "Can you contact Oliver urgently? I need to get a few clarifications from him to try and help Mikey's parents. Of course, he's doing well and is comfortable here as I hope, but it shouldn't be that a mother and son are separated for long." From Sarah's voice, it was impossible to tell how deeply she had taken Mikey and his parents' situation to heart. But now, knowing his wife's past, David understood how difficult it was for her. "Actually, Oliver gave me a password to a chat in case of something like this, where all messages automatically disappear. I think we can try to contact him." The man opened the necessary website, entered the data which he had memorized at his army friend's request, and a few minutes later exclaimed joyfully, "It worked! Oliver greeted me." Sarah cautiously advised, "Dave, ask him a question that will allow you to know for sure if it's your friend you're talking to. And if there's even the slightest doubt, immediately close the website and take the SIM card out of your phone." Alarmed by his wife's suspicions, David quickly typed a few phrases and waited impatiently for a response. Reading the received message, the man breathed a sigh of relief. "Everything's fine. It's definitely Oliver," he replied with our code phrase. Sarah nodded and asked, "Excellent. Write to Oliver that your wife will be chatting with him now, and give me the phone. I'll find out everything I need from your friend myself. Nothing surprises me anymore." David handed the smartphone to his wife. She chatted with the stranger for quite a while, then grabbed a pen, quickly wrote down a number on a bread wrapper, tore off the edge of the paper with the digits, squeezed it in her hand, and handed the phone back to her husband. "Okay, I'm going to the bathroom. I need to make a call. Write to Oliver to log into this messenger in an hour. Then, I hope, I'll be able to give him something concrete." Sarah left the kitchen and went to the bathroom, which had the best soundproofing in the apartment. Taking a few deep breaths, the woman dialed the number of her former father-in-law, which she had memorized. The phone was unavailable. Sarah gathered all her willpower and dialed her ex-husband's number. Soon, his voice came through the receiver. "I'm listening. Don't be silent." Sarah's voice was hoarse with emotion, and she replied, "Andrew, hello, it's Sadie. I need your help. More precisely, perhaps your father will be able to resolve the situation, but I can't reach him. The robot says the phone is out of service area." The man's demanding tone softened noticeably. "Sadie, it's good to hear from you. Father is abroad right now, but if you tell me what the problem is, I will certainly try to help in any way I can. I work in the regional prosecutor's office now, so all my connections are at your service." "Thank you," the woman replied, told him everything she had learned, and dictated the number she had written down. "Okay, Sadie, I understand everything. It's not the simplest matter, but it's solvable. I think in the end, there's a more influential force for every thug. I'll try to help. Warn this acquaintance that I'll call him tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, depending on how things turn out, from my phone, and he can safely accept the call. Thank you, Andrew." Without waiting for her ex-husband's reply, Sarah ended the conversation, which had been very difficult for her, and washed her face with ice-cold water, hoping it would bring her at least some semblance of peace of mind. Even during the conversation with Andrew, she had wanted to apologize to him but couldn't. The bitter resentment towards the man's carelessness, which had caused her to lose her children, still burned in the woman's heart. At the same time, Sarah perfectly understood that without the intervention of her ex-husband, who had extensive connections in the region, Mikey's family was practically doomed, and she wanted to protect the boy and try to save his parents. The woman sat in the bathroom for some time, regulating her heartbeat with breathing exercises. Seeing that almost an hour had passed, she returned to the kitchen to David and told him what Andrew had said. The man wrote the information received from his wife to his friend and hugged Sarah tightly. He saw how his beloved woman had become drawn in the last hour and didn't know how to help her. He wanted to protect her from all misfortunes, but instead, Sarah had to, as David easily guessed, turn to the person who had almost utterly destroyed her life. The conversation had agitated the woman. She freed herself from David's embrace and automatically began clearing the table, not paying attention to the fact that she was throwing away food her husband hadn't touched at all. Finally, the man took her hand and suggested, "Stop this fuss. It's been a difficult day and we need to rest." Even listening to her sleeping husband's peaceful breathing, Sarah couldn't calm down. Images of her little boys appeared before her eyes as if in reality. Here are Anthony and Brian smiling at her with their toothless smiles, then going to kindergarten for the first time and clinging to the window, waving their little hands at her, giving her cards for Mother's Day. Here they are, clearly in league with each other, instead of falling asleep, loudly and together, applauding when she starts singing them a lullaby. How many pleasant moments, so carefully stored somewhere far in her memory, and how brutally everything was crossed out by an accident. How many times she had warned her sons not to take risks, yet they still didn't listen. However, what was the point of being angry now? Anthony and Brian were gone, and their father was now the only hope that Mikey would be able to hug his mother very soon. Let Andrew be able to help at least this woman who was completely unknown to Sarah. Mikey stirred and began to murmur something, and Sarah, slipping out from under her husband's arm, hurried to the boy. She carefully adjusted the blanket he had almost thrown onto the floor, felt his forehead, afraid that the child had a fever, and sighed with relief, feeling that, based on her experience, everything was fine. Mikey opened his eyes, and Sarah, sitting on the edge of the sofa, began quietly singing a lullaby. The boy had long since fallen asleep, but the woman remained sitting beside him, and she so wanted the child to return to his parents as soon as possible. And at the same time, she knew she would desperately miss spending time with him. When the sky, visible through the gap between the curtains, lightened, Sarah quietly went to the kitchen to make herself coffee and work on documents, because there was no point in going back to sleep. In these dawn hours, perhaps somewhere far away, matters directly concerning Mikey's fate were being decided, but Sarah was powerless to influence anything. She had already done everything she could, overcoming her deadly resentment, and now all that remained was to wait for the result. Carefully studying the papers, the woman made notes in the margins, wrote her suggestions on a separate sheet, and neatly putting everything back in the zippered folder, began, trying not to make noise, to prepare breakfast. She had already decided to ask her boss for leave so as not to overly tire the boy with moving around unfamiliar places. Waiting for a convenient time to send messages, Sarah texted her boss that she would send the prepared documents through her husband and began thinking about how to cheer up the little guest, who, of course, was worried about the forced separation from his parents, although he tried to be brave. When David, having showered but still yawning, looked into the kitchen, Sarah had almost everything ready. She invited her husband to the table and asked, "Dave, stop by Robert Stevenson's on your way and give him the folder with documents from me. I've already warned him that I won't be able to come to work for a few days. If anything needs to be reviewed, he can send it to my email or forward it through you. In an extreme case, of course, I'll come, but I wouldn't want to bother Mikey. I wanted to take him to Mom's and then go to a children's entertainment center. Why should he constantly play on the computer? Let him have fun, play around so he doesn't think about sad things. It seemed he had nightmares last night." David agreed with his wife's plan, and quickly finishing breakfast, thanked her and started getting ready for work. Mikey woke up much later, but Sarah didn't think of waking him. She wanted the boy to feel no discomfort. The woman fed the child and then suggested, "Let's stop by my mom's for a little while, and then we'll go somewhere to have fun." A message arrived on Sarah's phone, and she smiled, seeing the notification about money being deposited. David had made sure his wife wouldn't have financial problems. The woman smiled and asked the boy, "Would you like to go to an amusement park with me? It's not very far from the city, and there are lots of options for fun activities. A fun house, rope courses, and I think even a climbing wall. Do you like active entertainment like that, or maybe you prefer movies? That's no problem either. I haven't seen a movie on the big screen in ages," Mikey admitted shyly. "Honestly, I'd rather go to the amusement park." "Well, then that's where we'll go." Eleanor Peterson was very happy when her daughter came to her with the boy. This meant Sarah had believed her husband and hadn't acted rashly, demanding that the child be placed somewhere else. From her painful memories, she saw that Sarah seemed to have thawed even after a brief interaction with Mikey, and she could barely make them leave as early as possible. "Daughter, I'm feeling absolutely wonderful today. Go, have fun. If anything happens, of course I'll call. But don't worry at all, really. I feel like I even have more energy today after yesterday's walk." Turning to the boy, Eleanor Peterson asked, "Mikey, I ask you, rest well for yourself and for me." The boy nodded completely seriously and promised, "I'll ask Sarah to take pictures and send them to you. You have a smartphone, right?" The woman smiled and praised him. "Well done, that's a great idea. Exactly, it will be like I'm having fun with you. Sarah, check if your phone is charged." Sarah reassured her mother, saying she could charge her phone in the car at any moment. Soon the guests left Eleanor Peterson, and she, left alone, began to dream that her daughter would finally decide to become a mother again. It was clear to the woman that Sarah was excellent at getting along with children, but she had suffered for so many years, deliberately avoiding contact with them. "May everything turn out well for my long-suffering girl," Eleanor Peterson prayed aloud, hoping that this request would be heard somewhere above. Sarah, driving the car especially carefully, took Mikey out to have fun, and felt the weight of the responsibility she had voluntarily taken on pressing down on her more and more. The boy first asked to go on the rope course, and the woman agreed. Although at the sight of the rope stretched high up, she wanted to grab the child in her arms and not let him go. Sarah watched the playful child without taking her eyes off him and occasionally took photos, but didn't dare to get distracted by sending particularly expressive pictures to her mother. The woman felt that if she was distracted for even a few seconds, something bad would happen to the boy. The thought came to her of the level of despair Mikey's mother must have been in to agree to give her son to a practically unknown person. Such an act could only be decided upon due to a real threat to the child's life and health. So she, Sarah, had no right to let down the woman who knew the bare minimum of information: name, last name, age, and that the unfortunate woman and her husband were involved in a situation they couldn't get out of on their own. However, Sarah, no matter how you looked at it, was in an even better position. Helen, Mikey's mother, knew even less about the people who had sheltered her son. Monday, filled with entertainment, flew by unnoticed. The boy, tired from numerous active outdoor activities, fell asleep after a hearty dinner and rested completely calmly until morning without crying out or waking up. David and Sarah chatted quietly in the kitchen. The woman enthusiastically talked about how bravely Mikey had conquered the rides and showed photos. Tomorrow, after visiting Mom, I want to take our guest to our museums and then go to the cinema. Or vice versa, whatever Mikey wants. If you can, join us, it will be fun. He's so funny and sometimes says such profound things. Today he told me that adults deliberately try to look serious so people are afraid of them and don't bother them. Can you imagine? The man agreed that there was something reasonable in this conclusion and suggested, "Sarah, let's go to sleep too, like Mikey, because tomorrow, as I understand it, will be no less busy." Neither Tuesday nor Wednesday brought news from Andrew or the boy's relatives. Although the child visited various entertaining and educational places, his mood worsened with each passing day. He thought and felt sad more often. David and Sarah understood that the boy missed his family more and more, but they couldn't influence the situation. Only on Thursday, when Sarah and Mikey were visiting Eleanor Peterson, did the long-awaited call come. Andrew informed his ex-wife that the main difficulties were behind them and warned, "There are still some things to resolve, but those are minor. The main thing is that the boy is no longer in danger. His parents have already set off for the city where you live now. I warned them to call you in advance when they're arriving and confirm the address. Anyway, I will, of course, see this through to the end. You don't need to worry." Sarah thanked her ex-husband sincerely. "Thank you, Andrew, and forgive me for everything." The man's voice rang out when he replied to the woman who had caused him so much pain. "Sadie, you can't imagine how happy I am to hear from you, even if it's for this reason. I wish you happiness, and if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. I'll always be happy to help." Sarah said goodbye to her ex-husband, and Eleanor Peterson, who had overheard her daughter's conversation, couldn't believe her ears. It seemed her Sadie had just had a perfectly normal conversation with the person she had once loved deeply and then hated. "Mom, we need to leave. Mikey's parents are on their way, and I still need to bathe him." The child understood that he would soon see his mom and dad and started jumping around the room, shouting, "Hooray!" Sarah could barely calm him down. In her joy at the successful resolution of the situation, Eleanor Peterson gave the boy her photo and a stamp collection he had liked as a souvenir. "Here, Mikey, you can look at the album and remember me." The child promised, "Thank you, but I won't forget you, Grandma Ellie, even without the stamps." Taking advantage of the moment, Sarah called her husband to tell him the good news, but it turned out he already knew. "Sarah, Oliver already told me that thanks to your help, everything was resolved. I'm coming home by taxi now to prepare for our guests." Sarah was a little sad to part with the boy who had awakened memories of the happiest days with her sons, and she invited him to visit a toy store on the way. "You know, I also really want to give you something. Choose whatever you want." The boy didn't resist, but, seemingly shy, he didn't spend long walking among the shelves of toys and very soon took a robot from the shelf that was far from the most expensive. On the way to the checkout, Sarah put a plane in the basket that Mikey had once talked about admiringly and a few board games. "Oh, so much stuff," the child exclaimed in surprise. "What a holiday today," Sarah agreed. "Yes, Mikey, today is a very big holiday." By the time the doorbell rang, the boy was clean from his bath and cutlery was set on the table. Helen, as soon as she crossed the threshold, rushed to her son, hugging and showering him with kisses. The boy's father handed Sarah flowers, and Oliver gave David a strong, manly hug. After Mikey took on the role of an adult and introduced his parents to the apartment's hosts, everyone sat down at the table. Helen volunteered to help Sarah and confessed, "If it weren't for your kindness, I don't even know how we would have managed it all. I can't imagine how to express my gratitude. My husband and I have collected some money to compensate for the expenses for Mikey and your inconvenience." Sarah turned pale and replied, "Helen, please take this envelope back immediately. Don't insult me with this gesture. Your son will be going to school soon. Spend this money on him. And if it's not too much trouble, sometimes send me and my husband photos of him. That will be the best gratitude." An embarrassed Helen burst into tears and hugged Sarah. When Mikey, Worried about his mother and Sarah's long absence from the table, looked into the kitchen. He saw the women weeping, unable to hold back their tears, and asked like an adult, "What happened? Did you hit yourselves? Did you cut yourselves? Did you burn yourselves?" Sarah and Helen wiped their tears in sync. His mother calmed her son. "Everything's fine, darling. Everything is just wonderful." Hugging the boy, she picked him up, lifted him, and spun him around. Sarah watched the happy people and felt no envy, but wished that all the troubles for this family were in the past. After the guests left, Sarah trustingly leaned against her husband and confessed to him, "You know, I think I'm ready for motherhood. Mikey proved to me that children are the greatest happiness." The man didn't try to dissuade his wife. Soon Sarah delighted him and Eleanor Peterson with the news of her pregnancy. Right on time and without any complications, the woman gave birth to a daughter. They named the girl Victoria, in honor of David's army friend and as a symbol of victory over the terrible memories of the past.